In 2007, Fall Out Boy's third album, Infinity on High, debuted at number one on the Billboard charts. Four of the songs charted on the US Billboard Hot 100, and it sold over 2.4 million copies in the US. Though the band are often associated with the mid 2000s emo revival, they ended up cracking the pop market in a significant way. Our guest today is Fall Out Boy's singer Patrick Stump, who it turns out is a huge fan of ska. Back in the 90s, Patrick didn't just casually listen to mainstream ska bands off the radio. He was deeply involved in the scene. Ska was his music, and he considered himself a ska fan first and foremost. Over the years, his deep love for ska has somehow escaped the attention of the media. That is, until now.
Who would have thought the singer of Fall Out Boy was so into ska? I had zero idea. I know that we talked to Brian, and Brian had brought up the Animal Chin connection, but I was completely unprepared for this.
Yeah, Brian didn't prepare us to the extent of which he was a ska fan. It was more just like, oh, he's a big Animal Chin fan. No, it turns out he's a big ska fan.
Yeah, we talked about every avenue of ska, all the way from traditional through third wave, and I feel like no stone was left unturned.
Couple hours before this interview, you sent us a recording of yourself playing trombone over Sellout.
That was freshly recorded. I recorded all of that.
You recorded all of it. Okay.
Oh, so Aaron was right.
Yeah, Adam and I had a debate about whether that was you playing on top of the original recording or whether you did everything. And yeah, I thought you did everything.
That's convincing. That's great. No, that was me. That was all me.
This is amazing.
When did you do that? You did that just recently?
No, I did that kind of at the beginning of the pandemic. So I've been doing film scoring for the past 5 years. And long story short, I'm not a great instrumentalist at a lot of instruments, but no one seems to mind, so I got emboldened where I'm like, screw it, I'll play trombone too. And I took like 3 lessons when I was like 12. I hadn't, touched it since then. And so that was day one of trombone as an adult.
It sounds convincingly good. Like I was
Awesome.
like, for sure you were like a marching band, like middle school kid or something.
No, man, I was such a jerk about it. And I had seen some interview with The Clash, and they were talking about how, they purposely didn't want to learn their instruments. And I was like, yeah, man, like that's what I want to do. And so I did that all throughout high school. And in retrospect, now, like I said, I've been film scoring, and scores, you're dealing with tons and tons of written music, and you're like, yeah, it would have been nice if I paid attention in school, like maybe a little bit.
I feel like I read a similar article with Sonic Youth saying like, man, don't learn how to play your guitar, just like rub it against things.
Yeah, there's some value to that, but I mean, it's also, then you find yourself in a situation where, people are talking about the key and, and walking bass lines and, whatever, time signature changes, rhythm subdivisions and polyrhythms and stuff. And you're like, yeah, it sounds cool, whatever.
I have a random music question for you.
Yes.
The fast punk beat. Do that, do that, do that, do that. What do you call that?
I guess I always associated it with Fat Records. That was like the first time I heard it. And obviously the older I got, the more I'm like, oh, well, I mean, it's associated with lots of different, subgenres of punk. A lot of people associate it with like the Discord thing or whatever. So yeah, for me, it was a Fat Records beat because that was the first place that I got to know it.
Yeah. I'm always just interested to see how different people describe that beat.
Yes, everyone has the completely different one. I agree.
I always call it the money beat because that's what
Yeah.
our drummer called it. So
I like that. There you go.
yeah.
We tried that once. We tried it on one record, and I was pretty amped about it, and that song didn't do no one really latched onto it, so I was like, "Okay," but I had a blast.
Didn't you start out on drums as a musician?
Yeah, so I was a drummer first, which back to the kinda, the origins of me getting to play other instruments and kinda teaching myself. in high school, it was really easy to get away with, just doing everything by ear because as a drummer, you don't, you can kind of figure that out. You kind of use your instincts. But my dad was a folk singer and well, is a folk singer. And so I kind of knew some guitar and stuff like that just by osmosis. In terms of seriously playing an instrument, I was a drummer up until like the day that Fall Out Boy played live because like we just couldn't find a singer really. And it was one of those things too where we had gone through a few guitar players and trying to find we were like a five piece and we were gone through a few guitar players and me just knowing what I knew from my dad and stuff. I ended up being about as good as like, the guy that we'd have for like 2 days for like 2 weeks or something, like I was about as competent as a player who hadn't played these songs very much. And so I was like, eventually I just became a guitar player and branched off into other stuff. Like I said, I read this Clash article and that totally changed and ruined my life because I insisted on just, teaching myself everything and I didn't have tabs or anything. I made myself figure it all out. And in retrospect, I'm like, it would have been cool to know what people are talking about. Like that would be great.
What was it about drums that drew you to playing them as an instrument?
I don't know. It was just the first thing that I loved. I just instantly I don't remember a time where I didn't wanna play drums. That was it was my first love. It was my first relationship with an instrument. And I remember we had these big buckets of Legos when I was a kid, my brother and I. My brother's a, like, engineer. He's, like, a IT guy. He's, like, brilliant, and so he would dump out all the Legos and build these, like, elaborate, crazy things. I mean, I just structurally insane things, and I would take the now empty buckets and, beat on them. My dad had a pair of sticks sitting around somewhere, and so I would play on the buckets, and I must have been about I don't know, I was probably, like, 8 or 9 or something, and I did it to everything. I did it to, I mean, a lot of ska, actually. That's the that's kinda what, brings me here, so
Yeah, what type of stuff were you listening to?
there's that period where you're a kid and you start to establish who you are separately from your parents, because like up to a certain point, you just listen to whatever your parents listen to. My brother had a girlfriend who had some ska records. There was a Dance Hall Crasher, that first Dance Hall Crashers one with the like Charlie Brown cover.
Yeah, the old record. Yeah.
The old record, yeah. So she had it when it was like a cassette and it was like the current record, I think. And, she had that and she had a Mustard Plug record. And so that was my first exposure to that. And I was like, "This is awesome, and I gotta find this." And then, you're armed with what you're armed with. So I'm this little kid trying to go to, like, Best Buy in the early '90s. It's not like you're finding those records there. So I kinda had to make do with whatever was there. Eventually, it was like Rancid and Goldfinger and that kind of stuff. You could go to a store and find those records before I really understood that there were like, independent record stores and, but that was kind of like my entry point. And like No Doubt was obviously huge suddenly, like right around then. And I would get those records and look at all their thanks and then try, like the thank yous. And then I would try and track down everyone that they thanked on records, So like that's how I got into Hepcat because the saxophone player for Hepcat played on something. God, what did he play on? He played on something, he was a guest on something else, that kind of stuff. And so I kind of branched out from there into just lots and lots and lots of ska. But that was my first, you know, this is my music kind of thing.
Do you remember the first ska show you went to?
Real Big Fish. It was Real Big Fish and Kara's Flowers, who became Maroon 5 at the House of Blues in Chicago.
What do you remember about that show? Anything specific?
So we were talking about this before we started recording, but I'm like a super, super homebody. I'm really not, I'm kind of like, I think agoraphobic or something. I don't know what the deal is, but so it took a lot for me. I talked my sister into taking me to the show and, I stood in the back, but not really by the merch table, just kind of like there was a little bit of a space where there was no one there. And I kind of just stood there with my, I had, these like two-tone like wingtip Doc Martens, I like made sure to put those on and everything, and I stood there and danced by myself. And it was the kind of thing where if anyone made even eye contact with me, I would have like, hidden forever and never go, whatever. But, in the moment I was very there.
That you felt the comfort to just kind of let loose a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, and it was, and Chicago at the time, it's weird because I'm sure there are and have been a lot of other big scenes there, but I really ironically, even though, Fall Out Boy is really associated with, Chicago punk rock scene, I didn't know that many bands. I don't know. I didn't at the time know anywhere near as many local bands while we were playing as I did when I was a kid listening to ska because, I mean, it was massive. We had first off, we had, Jump Up Records. Chuck Wren had the radio show, and so I would listen to that every weekend, and I would record it every episode, and so we had that local presence. But then there were also, I mean, Blue Meanies were huge. Hot Stove Jimmy was a big deal. There were all these local bands, and I was just obsessed with all of that stuff. I just ate it up. Yeah, so it was kind of like there was enough of a community there about ska in Chicago that, like, I didn't feel like a total weirdo, going to the Real Big Fish show. I felt kinda bad for Kara's Flowers playing not decidedly not ska before Real Big Fish.
Was there any particular ska drummers or ska albums that you like played along to or kind of learned how to play from?
Well, yeah, I mean, that first Goldfinger record, I played a lot of that, Here in Your Bedroom. I mean, just that beginning, is very prototypically, 90s ska with the cross stick and the busy hi-hat stuff. So that was one, and obviously Rancid was like the coolest thing in the universe when I was a kid. That was just like it didn't get cooler than that. So I played along to a lot of Rancid stuff, but then gradually, as a drummer, I got really into traditional ska. I really liked a lot of the hi-hat, the that that kind of stuff. So, I mean, that was just kind of a broad thing, Scatolites and yeah, Hepcat was kind of my entry point into a lot of that.
How good are you at a traditional ska beat?
Pretty good. I would say I'm probably better at that kind of stuff than I am at, like, metal, whatever. It's funny, as a drummer, you become kind of a specialized tool, it's not like I play ska and reggae pretty well because that was, like, my first thing that I played, It's a little bit harder to do the money beat, because it just didn't come up as much.
Was your first band a ska band?
Yeah, so my first 2 bands, I kinda talked other kids into doing ska bands. Weirdly, so I never considered myself a singer or an instrumentalist of any kind other than a drummer, but I was trying to put together a ska band and no one would play bass or sing. And so, I borrowed a, like, Steinberger bass from the jazz teacher at my school, and we did a Mustard Plug cover at the talent show that year, and I had to sing it, and it was so funny because I was desperately afraid of singing in front of people, and I just kinda, looked down the whole time and didn't move, but and, I'm playing bass for, like, the first time ever. I kinda made it easy on myself, and it worked, and, it wasn't a total train wreck, but, yeah, my first 2 bands were ska bands, but it's also kinda like, we didn't it's not like we played shows or anything.
Do you remember the name of the Mustard Plug song that you guys played?
Yeah, it was Mr. Smiley.
Mr. Smiley. What were your two band names?
That I don't remember.
They weren't ska, like, pun names, were they?
No, they weren't ska pun names. Again, I couldn't talk anybody into that. It was kinda like I was basically, because I was obsessed, and really no one else shared my zeal for it, in the same way. So I could get there were a couple guys in the jazz band that, played horns, and I could get them to, like, show up and stuff, but they weren't really, like, amped about it.
So we interviewed Brian Diaz.
Yeah.
So he says that you are a huge Animal Chin fan.
Yeah, so Animal Chin was another big thing, a big, like, entry point for me. So I don't really it's funny, Fall Out Boy is kinda seen as a rock band, as a pop rock band, and it's weird because that kinda puts you in these weird circles where, people talk to you about, I don't know, rock, hard rock and stuff, and I really didn't have that. I had punk rock as a I was really into a lot of the politics of, like, ska punk, and so that was a thing that kinda held me over on a lot of the heavier stuff, but it wasn't like if you took that out of it, I didn't just love the music enough, nothing against it, it just wasn't my thing as much. And then Animal Chin was amazing because it was kind of so all the kids agree, that record, it was heavy and, like, kind of punk rock, but it was also very ska, and it was also very musical, really, really, really musical, and that was a that really grabbed me and kind of pulled me in, and so it's in a lot of ways, it was my transitional thing between ska and, pop punk or whatever, because I could shut off the part of me that's like, "Ugh, rock and roll," it just wasn't my thing as much, but Jamie's just such a good songwriter, and it was just so I don't know. I mean, yeah, it was a big deal for me, for sure.
There's a song on that album, there's like an instrumental ska album, song called FTDB. Do you know what that stands for?
I don't.
It stands for "Fuck the Decepticons Bus." They were another ska band. I think they toured with Animal Chin, and they had this big purple bus, and I guess the guys in Animal Chin just found these guys repulsive because they had taken like a 2-liter bottle and cut the bottom off of it, and then ran a tube out the door, and then they taped it to like the handle, like near the door, so that you could just pee into that and it would go down the tube out the van while they were driving.
Ugh, ugh.
And so they were just like, dude, fuck the Decepticons bus. That's what that song is.
Oh, Van Wars. I remember that stuff.
Good stuff.
Gross.
So growing up in Chicago, like the Chicago area, were you going to shows at Fireside Bowl then?
Yeah, yeah. So, lots of shows at Fireside Ball. Though, to be entirely honest, I didn't go to that many ska shows because I was just so scared. I didn't really grow all that much, but I was even smaller then. I was a little guy, and I was really scared of people and scared of crowds and stuff. So it took me a lot to go to shows. And so I would go to a lot of local shows. I saw a lot more local shows than I did like basement shows, that kind of thing. I didn't start really going to the Fireside until I was probably about like a lot of the wave of ska bands kind of ended. Like a lot, like I think Blue Meanies had kind of broken up or petered out by the time I was going to Fireside, that kind of stuff. And Hot Stove Jimmy became Cougars.
You never saw Animal Chin at Fireside then?
I never saw Animal Chin. I never got to see Animal Chin.
Never got to see him. Dang.
No, I never got to see him. And it's funny because I've known Jamie for a long time because we played a showcase before we were signed to Fuel by Ramen. Fuel by Ramen put us on a showcase at South by Southwest, and it was us and the Stereo, and I was just in awe. I was just totally just like, this was like the Beatles or something. I was such a big fan of Jamie's stuff. Seeing the Stereo and knowing his stuff from Animal Chin, I was just like, "Oh my god." And he was always very supportive and very cool. So we've talked a lot about Animal Chin, but I never actually got to see him.
Oh man.
Weird.
Not even the reunion they did in Minneapolis.
No, no, I didn't get to I don't like I said, I don't get out much.
Yeah, yeah.
So, eventually I got into hardcore and I was definitely a mail order kid where I had all the I had every 7-inch, but I didn't, I went to like a handful of shows, you know. It wasn't until basically I was the kind of guy where I had to have a group of friends, like, force me to go kind of, so we would so I did go to a lot of shows eventually, but it wasn't until, like, junior, senior year.
Did you find that ska shows were more comfortable or more welcoming than other types of music, or was that not really the issue?
Yeah, yeah, ska shows were pretty rad. So that was cool. Though one of the things that was I don't know if this was everywhere or if it was heightened in Chicago, but we had a lot of like, community center shows and, basement shows and stuff where everyone just had to play together. So you would have like Skink and Pickle play with like, I don't know, like a death metal band, like really, really wild stuff because there were just, in the suburbs, there wasn't a huge, it wasn't like a huge demand for just ska shows. So it would just kind of be like general punk rock shows.
I mean, I feel like a big thing about that whole period was just it was, every show was a whole bunch of different bands, and
Yeah.
ska sat right alongside hardcore, right alongside emo, sat right alongside pop punk, and so you just got all of that in the same show.
Yeah, and that's really, how I got us exposed to a lot of stuff, how I got exposed to a lot and, I should say, how am I talking about Chicago and not talking about Slapstick? I mean, that was huge. I mean, that was everybody knew Slapstick and knew all those records, and so, that was another thing was you would go to shows and there would be like Honor System and that kind of stuff, bands that were coming out of Slapstick, and so that was another kind of way into other kinds of music. It was the fact that all those guys started other bands.
What would be your favorite slapstick offshoot? I heard you mention Honor System.
I mean, I really loved the early Alkaline Trio stuff because I was also kind of exhaustive about Asian Man, so everything that Asian Man put out, I picked up pretty much. And so I had seen an Alkaline Trio, I think it was like a 7-inch or something, and I was like, "Okay, awesome." Like, it was like it gave me permission to be into this, because up to that point, I had been really, really very focused on ska.
Yeah, I mean that's kind of follows Asian Man's broadening as well. Alkaline Trio and the other like slapstick offshoot
Yeah,
bands.
Tuesday, and I mean, there were so many too. It's kind of funny.
I always feel like it was like blowing on a dandelion, that band breaking up.
Yes. Yeah, no, it's really crazy, and I forget sometimes, how many bands had a relationship to even Less Than Jake, like, at some point, like, those guys got everywhere.
Back to Animal Chin in the Midwest, though, were they very popular?
It wasn't huge. I had to track that record down. I really give a lot of credit to, Chuck Wren because that radio show was, like, everything, man. I mean, there were so many records that I had never like, even stuff like, everything from, The Impossibles to, like, Fishbone to there were so many different records that I never would have heard, you know, anywhere, and they were really hard to find. So Animal Chin, actually, all the kids agree because he played that record a lot and various different songs from it, including that instrumental. I would tape every one, and it was. I remember I had to go pretty far out. There was some record store in Bannockburn, which is the only place that I could find that CD. But it was definitely not easy to find. And it was funny because then when the band signed to Fuel by Ramen, they let us, go through and pick out, some of the back catalog stuff if we wanted any CDs. And I had no idea that Animal Chin had ever done anything on Phil Berman. I didn't know they had any other records. I just knew that one record front and back. And so it was really funny. I was like, "Oh, there's more." They did more stuff. It was yeah, I really just knew that one record, but it was like my favorite record.
Yeah, that 20 Minutes From Right Now EP is awesome. So good.
I mean, they're shredders. I love that band. I love that record a lot.
I always loved Animal Chin, but I hadn't listened to them in a while, and like in the last week I've been listening to that. All the Kids Agree again. So good, still holds up.
Really good.
My old band used to tour with them all the time.
Really.
And so like I put down my head in the same spots as them to sleep lots of times. Like one of my earliest tour memories in '98 was having Andy, the bass player, tell me what to do if we hit black ice. And then literally the next day hitting black ice and spinning our van out.
Dang.
And just hearing Andy's voice in my head.
Yeah, that was our van accident was the black guys. But it's funny. Andy was in Motion City soundtrack, and that was how I got into Motion City soundtrack.
Oh, was he? I didn't know that.
Yeah, very briefly at the beginning.
Oh, wow.
And I remember talking to Justin Pierre. I can't remember if he was in it when we played with them at this movie theater in Des Plaines. Yeah, there was a show that we did. It was the first time we played with Motion City soundtrack, and I think Andy was still in the band at the time. And I remember pulling Justin Pierre over and be like, "Wow, I'm a big Animal Chin fan." He's like, "Yeah, cool." It was very like I wasn't even sure if he knew what that band was. At the time. So, I mean, he did for sure. But it was just funny. It was like, you know, I was super fanning it.
Brian had said that you sometimes sound check with Animal Chin songs.
Yeah, he and I will sound check together with that because when I'm line checking, he's usually back behind one of the cabinets tuning basses, and I spend a lot more time on stage than I probably need to. I goof around, and actually, Andy, our drummer, and I will be, sometimes Andy and Brian Diaz and I will play Bleed, especially. That's the song. I mean, there's a lot of great songs on the record, but that song's so good.
Yeah, Brian had told me it was the first song, the sex song off the album.
Definitely something that Brian and I bonded on is the fact that, because he was in Edna's Goldfish, he was in a real ska band. So I had this dream. So there was a band in Chicago called the New Jacks, and I was obsessed with the New Jacks. They were the coolest band in my like I loved it. I still go back to those demos and stuff. It's funny because the guitar player ended up starting this band called Knockout, and Knockout is very central to Fall Out Boy's history. Fall Out Boy probably wouldn't be a band without Knockout. But anyway, his old band was the New Jacks, and I was so into the New Jacks, and it was this dream of mine to be anything in the New Jacks because they'd gone through like 40 people or something, you know. You know how it goes. And I never got to be one of those people. And it was such a bummer. But so when Brian and I, when we started touring and he was doing reunion show, I remember being like, oh wow, you were in a real ska band. Like, it's so cool.
Yeah, I was going to ask when you learned about Brian's ska past, if you remember.
I knew him. I like that was what reunion show was to me, was Ex Edna's Goldfish. That was like the thing. So like everything was related to ska to me.
So you knew Enda's Goldfish back in the day.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I don't take any credit for this. It wasn't like I was crate digging. I mean, Chuck Wren was exhaustive, and I was pretty obsessed with that radio show. So, basically every weekend I think it was on the weekends. I can't remember what day it was, but it was once a week. He would have the show. He'd play a bunch of new records. I'd like write them all down, all the ones I liked, and then I would try and find them. And eventually I found, mail order stuff and whatever, and he would put out there were some great compilations too, and so that was another way that I would hear a lot of bands through that. But so it was all that stuff.
I see. So what was it like when he started working for you then? Were you like a little bit of a fan?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I was nerded out about it. It's funny because he's very. I think on one level it's kind of like it's kind of like talking about your high school yearbook photo, But then at the same time, it's like it's neat that someone cares. I think is for him. I don't want to put words in his mouth, but I think it's funny that like I think it's funny to him that I'm like such a big ska fan.
So there was the show, one of the Edna's Goldfish reunion shows that was at like some festival that I think Fallout Boy played also.
Yeah, yeah, and I can't remember what the deal was, but I didn't get to see it.
Maybe it was other members of the band were there.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure. I feel like the other guys always manage to get out and do things.
Do you have like a favorite Edna's Goldfish song?
Oh gosh. I just remember the video. After YouTube, I remember looking up the video and because I didn't have that record, but I remember the seeing the video and after knowing Brian and like he's like a little kid, I mean, he looks like a little kid to me, I remember watching that a few times and he like, he was like, "Ah, turn that off."
I'm surprised by how good that video looks considering,
I
like,
know.
the story behind them making it. Like, it was they just, like, filmed it.
What was the story?
Brian told us they just, like, filmed it during a show.
It was like a little like all day ska festival.
And so, like, guys from Slow Gherkin are in the video.
Then the stereo, the guys in the stereo in there. Yeah.
Wild.
So the only time I've ever seen your band play, you guys were wedged in between, a local band from here called The Matches
Yeah, yeah, I remember the matches.
and Less Than Jake,
Yep.
and, it was at the Warfield.
Mhm.
And so that was my introduction to your band, and I remember thinking it was really weird that your bass player did all the talking and you were the singer.
Yeah.
And then the only other thing I remember about your set is him climbing on top of the bass amp, like 3 songs in, and, like, jumping off,
Yep.
and me just being like, "Damn, that looked like it hurt."
Yeah, he did he broke his foot a couple like, once or twice. I mean, it was a lotta that was kind of our thing. I was a drummer and a really shy person, I guess introvert. Like, I talk a lot and really fast in person, but I'm very scared of people as a thing, Um, and I always have been, and so it's like it's weird, like, I wouldn't say I've exactly stage fright, like, I don't mind playing music on a stage, like, that doesn't freak me out, but literally every other thing that you do on stage freaks me out, If I had to speak in front of people, it freaks me out, and, he just naturally always did that. I never wanted to be a singer, it was just I was the guy that could sing, and I really wanted to write music, and that was kind of the caveat was, "Okay, you can write songs as long as you sing them," and I was like, "Okay." Yeah, so he kinda took over a lot of the, front manning stuff without ever singing, and, it was great because I got to just focus on playing, Yeah, he was always jumping off of stuff and, breaking guitars and all of that, it was the whole thing.
Keeping Brian busy.
That was before we had Brian. I think that was probably why eventually we had to hire Brian was because it's like we you know, somebody's gotta actually take care of this stuff.
So I don't know about your van accident, so can we hear about that?
Oh, yeah, so, gosh, so we had a record, "Take This to Your Grave." It's our first record, and we were going to shoot a video for it. We were driving to Michigan to shoot a video for it, for "Where Is Your Boy?" And yeah, we hit some black ice and veered off the road and into a couple trees.
Mm.
Um,
Whoa.
yeah, it was amazing. I mean, it's really incredible because, um, you know, like 3 of the guys weren't wearing seatbelts because we were in, like, one of those, 15 passenger vans, and we would kind of, trade who got to sleep bench, you know? And so 3 of the guys were on the rotation to sleep on the bench, and so they weren't wearing seatbelts. And I mean, like, the tree came in through the window and stuff. I mean, it was like, and the van was totaled. It totally collapsed the one side. No one was hurt, seriously. Everyone had something, like, Pete had some, like, big gouge out of his calf, and Andy had some big cut on his lip, and we all had, like, glass in our hair and that kinda stuff, and a lot of, like, little cuts and nicks and stuff, but everyone was fine. It was amazing. I mean, it was a pretty serious accident that we just I have no idea how we lucked out of that. I mean, it was one of those things where, like, literally the way the van collapsed, if we had been, a couple inches forward or a couple inches behind, somebody would have died for sure. Like there's no way around it. We lost all of our equipment that was in the trailer. The trailer exploded and, wrapped around a tree, and, a lot of there were shirts that, our merch was in the trailer with, so there's shirts all over the freeway, and well, highway. It's not free over there, but, but, shirts everywhere, and, our amplifiers were all busted. Andy just got a new drum kit that we were gonna take with us to the video shoot, to have, to kinda show in it, and that was shattered. So, in the same way that, Pete always was the front man without being the singer, I really around that time we were transitioning into him writing all the words and me writing all the music, and because we just kind of started to understand that that's who we were, that, I really didn't care as much about the words and he really didn't care as much about the music, as long as those things were whatever. And so I had this big binder, like this 3-ring binder full of Pete would write me, write lines on a sheet of paper, and I collected them all in this 3-ring binder. And when the van got crushed, the way one of the seats, like the metal buckled, and it totally destroyed that binder. It totally trapped it and shredded it. And so it was weird because we that was all the lyrics we had, and that was an interesting thing just as a band, like our entire well of ideas uh got destroyed there too. So we had to kind of start from scratch.
Wow.
That's buff.
I mean, it's cool, whatever. I mean, I'm glad we're alive. So I'm glad no one was hurt.
Did you have any anxiety about going on tour again after that?
Yeah, it's funny. I've always been anxious about tour. Again, kind of owing to agoraphobia or whatever it is. I can't really figure out. I kind of talked to people about it, and no one really. It. I don't know. Could just be stage fright or something. But I was always anxious about touring. It was never my favorite thing because there's just this, like I said, I was this kid, I was too scared to go to shows. So then, like, you live your life as shows, it's a real big change. So I was always scared of it, but, um, I wasn't really scared of the driving thing. I wasn't really scared of, like, the, van accidents and stuff. It's weird. In retrospect, I'm like, "You should have been." That's really crazy, but I feel like it's this kind of rite of passage that everybody has, like, "Oh, yeah, that was our van accident," like, whatever. I
Definitely.
feel like every band has that story.
Oh, so like it happened, so the chances of it happening again are slim, is like the thinking.
Yeah, exactly, and you're like, "That's not really how that works," but okay, I mean, like, you should still kind of be careful when you're driving, but.
Well, and in a weird way, like a weird, totally backward way, it like legitimizes you as a band.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, it kinda does. It was kinda like this, it's a war stories, it's kind of one of those things. It is a very standard thing, like, "Oh, yeah, that was ours. Oh, our van accident was but then, then there are bands like I remember this band Count the Stars, we were on tour with them, and then not long after we'd been on tour with them, they had a van accident, and, like, it pretty much I mean, this might be oversimplifying, but it seemed to nearly break up the band because, like, a couple guys were pretty badly injured, and then they just financially, it really took a toll on them. And so it's weird because again, I probably should have taken it more seriously. I probably should have been more freaked out. But after the smoke clears and everyone's fine and no one's dead, I was like, cool, okay, let's move on.
Going back to Animal Chin really quick, when I heard that you were a fan of Animal Chin, it did actually click because I feel like you can see similarities in your singing and Jamie's singing. Was he an influence on your singing style?
Oh yeah, of course. I didn't really know how to sing. It wasn't a thing that I consciously tried to do or thought about or anything. It was kind of a thing that, frankly, I didn't know people couldn't. I didn't know that it was a skill. Then Fall Out Boy kind of started, and I was just showing them songs that I had written, and as part of showing them songs, I mean, I knew, like, 1 bar chord on guitar, so I'm, like, you know, kind of really rudimentary playing that while I sang these ideas, and it was funny, they were like, "Oh, you should sing," and I'm like, "Really? I mean, okay, I get sure. What do you think of the song?" So then when we had to start playing, when we started, playing out, I was kinda confronted with, like, people will consider you a singer now. You have to, like, think about what that means. You have to think about, like, what that sounds like. So I really didn't have much to rely on. Early on, especially, I was looking to Jamie, and I had kinda gotten into Saves the Day. So those 2 bands, it was like, Try and sing like that, I'll try and sound like them." I did a lot of impersonations as a kid, that was, like, one of my things, I would do cartoon voices and stuff, and so singing wasn't a thing that I did as a serious thing, it was another, silly voice, it was another impersonation, it was no different than me doing Elvis Costello or Christopher Walken or something, it was just another voice. And so when I had to do it in front of people, I had to find a voice to do it in. I didn't even know what I sounded like as a singer, you know? And so I was basically impersonating Jamie and impersonating Chris from Saves the Day, because that was the only thing that I was like, well, these are bands I like. I mean, this is what they sing like, you know?
I mean, you can't really go wrong with those 2 as your influences. Those are pretty good singers.
Well, and that's the thing is that I still, I look back on those records and I'm like, yeah, I mean, I was very, kinda hard on your sleeve, and they both know that. I've talked to both of them at length about it, about how big a deal that was for me. But, I was a drummer and I took drums a lot more personally and seriously, but as a singer, for years, I mean, the band was on MTV and stuff before I was like, "Maybe I'm a singer actually." Like, maybe that's a thing that I actually have to start taking seriously, because up to that point, I just thought of myself as impersonating my heroes.
Did you have the Misfits of Ska 2 comp?
Of course I did.
Okay, so you know the Animal Chin song on there, "Time Out"?
Yeah, of course.
And it has the part the I think it's like the bridge right before the breakdown,
Mhm.
and so there's like a long vocal and then Jamie sings really high.
Yeah.
The first time we played with Animal Chin, he was singing it a octave lower. Our whole band was standing there, like, pointing up, like, "No, sing it high." And then so, like, the next time it came around, he, like, hit it high, and we all lost our minds.
Yeah, I mean, he's got such a great voice and such a great tone, when he goes really up high like that. Yeah, I mean, that compilation, that was a huge compilation for me. There were so many songs on that. I love that. There's a band, Absence, and that was, like, the only
Oh,
thing I
yeah.
ever found of them was that. In the advent of YouTube, I think I tracked down their demo or something, maybe, like, 5 years ago or something, but before that, it was just this magical thing where there was this crazy demo, this crazy song on that comp where I was like, "What is this? I love this."
Yeah, that's one of my favorite songs off that comp. Aaron and I talk about Misfits of Ska and Misfits of Ska 2 a lot because he sees Misfits of Ska 1 as, like, kind of the big turning point, and for me, it was Misfits of Ska 2, like, that was the one that really did it for me.
That was my preferred one, sorry to say.
I love that the Absence song is your favorite song on there too. That song's so crazy.
Yeah, man, it was a shredder, it was so crazy.
That band had 3 singers.
I know.
Link 80, when they did the last tour with Nick, they played a show with Absence, and, Seth, the sax player, sent me pictures. It just looked like the weirdest band. It looked like Corn mixed with, like, Coming Correct, like, mixed with Mustard Plug.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So wild. I'm just opening this up again, looking at that record, looking at what was on there. Kimuri, I remember tracking that record down because that was amazing. Obviously, Link 80, Pocket Lint. That was a weird one because, like, that's another one of those bands that, like, I don't know that the band made as big a splash, but those members ended up being everywhere, Absence, yeah, Thumper, I loved Thumper. I tracked down that record too.
Yeah, Adam brings Thumper up quite a bit.
Oh, they're so good live. I just remember just like whenever they would hit that breakdown in Backstabber, our whole band would be on the dance floor and we would all start hardcore dancing.
So ridiculous. That again, I got into hardcore through ska because there was so much ska-core stuff. The Hippos, I love the Hippos. That was one of my favorite records, that first one. I remember tracking that down. Pot Shot, I like that record too. I love this Bucko 9, but like spelled $9. Oh, the Eclectics. The Eclectics were a big band in Chicago too. That was another, cast a fairly long shadow there. But yeah, that comp was a big deal for me.
Aaron's old band Flat Planet is the second to last track on that.
Oh yeah.
And that's Aaron singing on that track.
That's the only song I sing lead on. Well, I sing part lead on some songs, but that was the only one I sing lead on.
Nice.
Flat Planet was like my favorite band, like as a teenager, and they played with the Hippos in a barn. And I think actually I opened that show in like a shitty punk band.
Adam and I are both from a small town called Gilroy, California. So we were his introduction to ska, I think, because we're the local band.
Yeah.
That's awesome. But that's the thing I think is so funny looking back on 90s ska especially, was it was such a weird confluence of different things in a way that, because I after that, that was my gateway, and then I got into two-tone ska, I remember going to Circuit City and looking for ska, and the only thing I could find was this, two-tone box set. And so it had, everything. It was like all their singles or something. So, that's where I got into Selector, and even Madness was on there and that kind of stuff. And then you get into traditional ska, and that was a whole other thing. I told my aunt, my aunt's awesome. She lived all over Africa for a lot of my childhood, and so she would come back with like just wild stuff. She brought me home. She had done a trip to Indonesia and brought me back an angklung, which is this obscure Indonesian, like it's kind of like a tuned rattle. Anyway, but so one time she said, "What music are you into?" I'm like, "Ska." And she came back with this, I don't know where she found it, but it was a traditional ska compilation, and it was like really deep cut stuff. I remember trying to remember who sang it. There's a song, "Oil in My Lamp," um, that was like a traditional ska song, and there's a song, "The Beatles Just Gotta Go." Um, it was like right when the Beatles came out, it was a ska song about how lame the Beatles were. I'm like, "Well, I don't know that I agree with that, but it's a great song." And they even end the song with like, "Don't wanna hold your hand." I'm like, "Great." I should say too, that I'm a film composer now, and that was an important part of all this was I Batman, 1989, the soundtrack, you've got Danny Elfman and you got Prince. And as a little kid, that was everything to me. That was huge. And I still see echoes of those 2 things on just about everything I do. But Elfman, especially back then, his scores are just dripping in brass. There's so much brass. And so I was in love with trumpet and trombone especially. And so to have, punk music that had brass was like, for me, that was a big deal because I could find my way in, and now I look at the way, so everything from jazz to, hip hop to, metal, I got into all of that through ska.
I was reading this interview that you guys did a few years ago about like some new music. Dear Future Self, the song. There's Pete answered this question, but he was basically saying that it was the product of you guys trying to do a ska song.
Yeah, so it's weird. Pete and I have had this ongoing thing for years where he's really deeply into reggae and I'm really deeply into reggae and traditional ska. And so we've tried just about every record to do a reggae or ska song, and it's never really happened. Like the closest we came was this song "Hold Me Tight," has kind of almost like a reggaeton beat. I've kind of tried a bunch. I've tried to throw it in there, and Dear Future Self kinda touches on it, but it doesn't really go there. But that's the thing that's funny is I think Pete's a lot more into, like, dance hall, and more and that kinda stuff, and I'm more into, like, old reggae and ska and stuff. So we always kinda try, but it's like we're both in the ballpark, but we're on completely different ends, so it doesn't really work, but
Do you have a hard time trying to make these things fit with what basically work as a Fallout Boy song?
yeah. Yeah, I mean, frankly, the weird thing about Fall Out Boy is that we all have such different musical backgrounds, and so it it's really difficult trying to get everybody to meet up, and try and find something that we can all do together. And I think that's been the challenge that guides the music more than anything is like what do we all feel comfortable playing at the same time? Because, you know, like I said, you were asking about drums. As a drummer and even as a writer, a lot of times I think in terms of like a ska drummer. That's still kind of the way that my brain works. And so I'll write these things and assume that and send that to Andy. Andy's a shredder, man. He's a tremendous drummer, but he feels metal and hardcore. Like he played for Earth Crisis for a minute. Like he's a very serious, hardcore drummer. And so and metalcore and that kind of stuff. And so they're just completely different disciplines. So you kind of have to find something in between there, because there's just like there's so much ghost notes and stuff in ska and so many, just parts of the symbol that you'd never play in any other kind of in any other kind of, rock music and stuff. Just that kind of stuff. Trying to find those things is difficult. It's always going to be there for me. I'm still at heart an early 90s ska guy.
What does the rest of the band think of ska?
Well, it used to be this thing that I had to, like, hide. Over the years, there would be parts of songs that I would kinda bring in and, they're like, "Ah, that sounds too ska." So it was definitely a thing that wasn't cool. I mean, they were hardcore kids. So, like I said, when you go to local ska shows or punk shows, there would be the hardcore band and there'd be the ska band and there'd be whatever. And so they were the hardcore kids. So they were like, "Whatever, like, it's fine. We'll play shows with you, but that's not our thing."
Didn't when Pete started Black Cards, wasn't that started out to be sort of ska-ish?
I think he intended it to be reggae. Like I said, Pete's very big on reggae. That's definitely a huge thing, and I think he tried to get Blackguards to be more reggae in it, and I don't know that again, everybody's not all on the same page. I don't know that he could get everybody on board with exactly his idea of reggae. Because even he and I, like I said, I'm not that up on anything post, like, the year 2000, like I don't really reggae to me is this I'm obsessed with an era, but, he's very ongoing in it.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, for me, yeah, I agree. I like old reggae and I like roots reggae. I'm not too much into reggae that gets outside of Jamaica. Whereas ska, I love the way the music has evolved in all these different forms. But yeah, with reggae, and not so much.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's nothing against it. I mean, it's amazing, really neat stuff. It's just like there's also the thing, frankly, you hit your 30s and there's brain chemistry at play where your brain stops being excited about new music. And so you'll hear something, you'll be like, yeah, that's cool. But it's like this objective, almost scholarly thing where you're like, I appreciate that. It's not the same thing as like when you're
Where it consumes your whole body and your yeah.
yeah, it's like a physiological response. We're like, "Oh my god." Like, I remember the first time I heard Goldfinger's record, Hang Ups, the very, very beginning of Superman, right? And it's so up, it's so busy, and there's that fast, drum count in at the beginning, and I was like, "This is the coolest thing I've ever heard ever," and when you're a kid, it's just like it's just there's nothing like that. And in retrospect, I'm like, I think that's, obviously that song will always mean something to me in that specific way, but I wonder if that's just like that must be what everyone feels when they hear their first favorite thing.
I remember when Skink and Pickle was such a big band for me in the when I was first getting into the music, and I would go see them play, and they in the early years they used to open with this instrumental song road zombie or something. I can't remember its name. It's the instrumental track that's on ska funk rustapunk, and hearing that song live gave me chills in a way that I cannot explain or even compare to any other live experience I've ever had. And I'm sure it had to do with my age and just like how my exposure to this music and my exposure to their performance, being so early and critical to me. But not the best song in the world, but in my my body reaction to it was like as though it was.
No, I mean, it's a big thing. Skank Pickle's a huge thing too. My sister used to work at, Sony and then at BMG. She was like a radio rep, and so she would get all these promo CDs, and they were all sitting in this, like, the ones that she didn't want were all sitting in this box in the basement, and I remember finding the Green album in there, and I was like, "Can I take this?" And she's like, "I don't know. Sure, whatever." And I was obsessed with it. I mean, that record, and that's another thing too, is that record, it's all these covers, so that's how I heard, Gorilla Biscuits, and how I, got into Oingo Boingo and that kinda stuff, was because of the covers on that record.
I actually like Green Album their best because I feel like they didn't do a great job with recording themselves until that album. That the album is recorded really well. The rest of them have problems with their recordings, especially having been a fan of them as a live band and comparing the experience of seeing them live to what the song sounded like in the recordings. I thought Green Album was like, okay.
Yeah, it sounds really good, and those songs, the songs on there, the non-cover songs are, like, my favorite Skank songs for sure, like, My Hair, I love that song. I was obsessed with that record. When I started learning bass, I would sit there forever, the boom, my fingers would be bleeding, you know?
Are you aware of any of the current, because there's kind of been a resurgence of newer ska bands. Are you aware of,
No, tell me.
there's a band called Catbite that I think you would really love.
Awesome.
They have a very like power pop, more traditional ska sound, but like still kind of punky.
Cool.
Kind of like garage rock more than punk, yeah.
Yeah, they're from Philadelphia. They're awesome.
Awesome.
And then there's a band from New Orleans called Bad Operation
Awesome.
that's so sick.
I'll check them out. It's funny, I was thinking about in the era, and, trying to go to, you know, Best Buy and stuff. Before I was really armed with the idea that there were, smaller record stores and punk rock, distros and things, trying to find ska at, the big chain store, and I would just buy anything that I knew to be ska or ska adjacent, you know? So, like, I'm not a Christian person, and I bought a lot of Christian ska because that was in the stores, And I was like, "This isn't my thing," but I get at least there's a saxophone, whatever.
Which Christian ska albums did you pick up?
I got There was a Supertones record that I found, and, Five Iron Frenzies. I was like, "This is cool. I'm happy with this. This is a good purchase." But, I had seen that it was a Christian record, and I'm like, "I don't know," but I loved the brass and everything, and the songs are rad, so whatever.
I know a lot of people point to like Mephistopheles as being the opposite.
Oh my god, I forgot to mention Mephistopheles.
Yeah, the people point to that band as like the opposite of Christian ska, but I'm gonna lobby and say it's the Blue Meanies. The Blue Meanies are terrifying.
Blue Meanies, well, especially when they would play, and so there was also a public access there was a lot of public access stuff in Chicago that did a lot of ska. I remember seeing the Blue Meanies on, it might have been like The Other Side with Ken Motti. It was a local show, and they played, and they all wore, pantyhose on their heads, and they looked just terrifying, like, so threatening, and the music was so dark and crazy. Full Throttle, I mean, that record is just ridiculous. What's the song? What's that song?
Smash the
Smash
Magnavox.
Magnavox. Oh my god. Like, when everything starts, you're like,
Yeah, that horn part's insane.
Oh, so good.
and how fast everyone in that band is at playing that part. I was like, "This is incredible. This is the coolest thing I've ever heard," and, like, terrifying, like, just overwhelming.
I used to just find the Blue Meanies terrifying, and I remember loading out at Fireside Bowl, and Billy Spunk was holding the door, and he was like, "Hi, Adam," and it just scared the shit out of me. And also I was just like, "How does Billy know my name? Like, what's going on?"
His speaking voice was always so threatening too, because like, it sounds like he sings, and
Yeah,
you're like, "Oh my god," like, you're the thing. They were so good. I mean, it's interesting, I think about that period, and I actually, I've mentioned them and Hot Stove Jimmy a couple times because I thought it was so interesting that Chicago had such a decidedly kind of, like, weird tech hardcore ska thing. We had these ska bands that were, like, kind of very, musical and, weird, you know? And I thought that was kinda cool. That was, like, our little stamp on it. Well, not ours, I was just at the show. We're one, but
you're part of Chicago, come on.
yeah, I mean, I'm from there, so but I thought it was a cool thing that that was, like, part of our sound, that we kind of had a little bit of a sound in that we had these bands that were loud and scary and weird and had, like, Hot Stove Jimmy, that 2nd record, when it starts off with there's, like, I think 5 horn players in that band at one point, and it's just like the loudest thing, just
Okay, I want to circle way back to the beginning because I didn't get to ask you this. So, beginning of the pandemic, you recorded yourself playing, or you recorded "Sellout." Now, so that what was the reason behind that? As your chosen song is because you knew that song on trombone.
Yeah, it was like the first song I learned on trombone. In the era where I was trying to do ska bands, in high school, whatever, junior high, whatever it was. I don't really remember, but I remember I did like 3 weeks of trombone lesson, with a rented trombone that smelled terrible. And so I hadn't touched a trombone in years and years and years. And then as I've been scoring film stuff, I did this one film where they specifically requested all instruments had to be played by me. And, the edict being that you would probably just play guitar and then maybe synthesizer or something like that. Well, then the filmmaker was like, after I started turning stuff in, they go, "Yeah, I mean, these I want more strings, but these kinda sound fake." And I'm like, "Yeah, well, there's a reason for that actually." But, um, I got a violin, and I've had a trumpet for years, and I kind of layered with those things, and they went for it, and I was like, "Really? Like, I don't know what I'm doing at all. You that no one's complaining? Okay, cool." And I got so bold, after that, I was like, "Screw it. I'm getting a trombone," you know? So that was, like, day 1 of trombone, in my adult life, was picking up a trombone again, and, I didn't remember how to grease it or anything. It was just kinda like, just seeing if I could make noise out of it.
The slide of the trombone was like the only real giveaway that it wasn't the real big fish. And then probably halfway through it, I was like, "That's not Aaron Barrett." I don't think. Like, but at first, I didn't notice that it wasn't Aaron Barrett.
I thought you were just playing over the recording.
That's great to hear. No, I was a big fan of I mean, I am a fan of all that stuff, and trombone was such a wonderful thing to me. I've always loved trombone since I was a little kid. And like I said, Danny Elfman, that Batman score, when the trombones really kick in, it's like it just hits you in the face. And so for punk rock to do that, I was like, yeah, please. And back to Rancid, there is a version of "I Want to Riot" that was in the Beavis and Butthead movie, Beavis and Butthead soundtrack. And I think it was with the Stubborn All Stars, like they did the brass. And the trombone solo on there, I don't know what it is, but that was the coolest thing in the universe to me. And so, that was like my dream was to play like that. And I still can. There's just like these little things that who I don't even know who it was. I don't even know who played that solo, but I was like, this is the coolest.
What are the chances of you guys putting a trombone in a road case so that if you guys cross paths at a festival or something with real big fish, you can jump up and I mean, I know you're kind of shy, but I love the idea of you just walking out on stage and just playing that song with them and just leaving.
I would kill it. I mean, that'd be awesome. I'd love to do it. I don't know. I mean, trombones take up a lot of space. It's a lot easier to carry around my trumpet.
In the post-COVID world, this has to happen.
Yeah, I mean, that'd be neat. As you noted, I'd probably be pretty scared. I'm always more scared of that stuff because, you're in somebody else's house. You're on somebody else's stage. If you blow it, you ruin someone else's show. It's such a scary thing to me. But yeah, I mean, that'd be awesome. The band toured with Less Than Jake early on, and Roger had found out that I was a big ska fan and that I was pretty big Less Than Jake fan. And and he had heard that, he's like, "Well, what's your song?" I'm like, "Automatic." That was my jam, man. I love that song. And one night, we were at, I think it was Irving Plaza, and the way that Irving Plaza, you go up these stairs, like, along the stage. So, like, if you're standing on the stage and playing, you can see all the people that are going up and down, into the backstage. And they were starting Automatic, and I was walking by, and Roger was on that side of the stage, and he just looks at me, he's like and he hands me his bass, and I was like, "What? What?" And I hadn't played the song in years, but I did used to know it. Um, and so I'm trying to remember the song, but also, a lot of people don't realize this, but I'm incredibly short and Less Than Jake are incredibly tall. So Roger, and he slings it down low too. So I'm trying to like hold the bass up with my knee while I'm trying to remember how to play the part. And but they let me play the song, and it was terrifying. It was so so scary.
So the big tour you guys were gonna do Weezer and Green Day, right? And then the Interrupters were going to be your opener. I was really excited that you guys were going to have a ska band as your opener.
Me too. That wasn't something that was suggested to me, and I'm like, "Yeah, of course, that's awesome." It's funny, I'm amazed that we got that tour together, and the only reason I think we did is because all 3 of the headlining bands are cool with each other, so we were able to, like, there wasn't a lot of ego, pushing each other around, but it's amazing how many moving parts there are, trying to get that to happen, so when that was the opener that was agreed on, I was like, "Yeah, sweet, let's do it." There's a song on that there's a what is it? Rude Boy in a Penitentiary? That song has a brass section in it, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, I should learn that." So I don't know. I don't know if I've never met them. I don't know if they would be down, but maybe I could try and bring my trombone on tour.
I want a whole Patrick Stump just ska EP. Like, come on, dude.
That's the thing that's fun. I would totally, it's I did a solo record a bunch of years ago, and it's weird because I'm happy about it. Like I like what I did, but there's an essential part of it, which is that like I never really wanted to be a singer. And so like I look back on that record and I'm like, this is great, but it's not really, I don't really want to, I don't have a purpose for a solo record. I don't really have a world that I want to like, I don't even write the lyrics. Sometimes it feels weird. Like I feel like, because, I'm pretty obsessive about ska from an era, but then, this is the first time I've probably ever gotten to talk about it. It just never comes up. And so part of me is like, it would feel contextually almost like, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for, but, like, I'm not sure it would be so accepted, "Yeah, I've got a ska record." It's like, "Yeah, sure," like, whatever.
I'd just put it out under a fake name and then just let people find out.
That I could do. That I might do.
I think that would be amazing.
But I have written a lot of ska stuff. I mean, that's I have a folder.
I mean, I'll take an instrumental ska album, man.
So you have a whole folder, right?
Yeah, I have a whole folder of ska music that I've written, but I don't know if it'll ever see the light of day because there's also like I wrote this one song and I was like, yeah, I like this a lot, and then I was shuffling through songs and I was like, that sounds way too much like this one. It was a Stubborn All Star song. I'm like, never mind. So sometimes that happens too, where you just kind of like I was playing and I'm like, I love this song. I'm like, oh no, you are writing a song that you like, that already exists that you enjoy.
Yeah, I can see that. But I mean, people are always saying they want the fourth wave. Patrick, what if the fourth wave is in that binder?
I guess. I don't know.
Thank you so much for listening to In Defense of Ska. If you haven't already, subscribe to my newsletter at aaroncarnes.substack.com. You will get episodes of the In Defense of Ska podcast and other content sent directly to your inbox. If you would like to pre-order my book, In Defense of Ska, go to clashbooks.com. It releases on May 4th, 2021. On that note, we leave you by saying, Ska now more than ever. Thank you.